Okay, so hello everyone, this is Patty from GenG Esports. I'm here with GenG's COO, Arnold Hur. And can you say hello to our audience?
Hey, everybody.
Okay, so it's been a while since I last talked to you. How is Korea, by the way?
It's good. I've been going back and forth between LA and Seoul for a while. And it's good that I think, vaccinations are happening. Things are starting to open up here a little bit. I think it's a little bit, everyone's still very careful. We're trying our best to just get through it and, come out the other side.
Good. Okay, so let's get started then. First, I'd like to know some of your personal journey to esports and your personal kind of career background, because I did some internet research on your personal career background and I thought they're pretty legit and interesting. It's kind of a pity that people don't know about it. So can you introduce yourself a little bit from I don't know, you worked at Wall Street and then Google, is that right?
Yeah, sure. I guess so. I'm a Korean American. I originally grew up in Los Angeles. I grew up in a very, basically, I guess I've been working since basically I was 16, right? Because I think in the US, you can only start working when you're 16. And I had a bunch of different random jobs. I worked at basically a Subway sandwich shop. I've worked at a Jamba Juice, P.F. Chang's restaurant, Guess Clothing, did a bunch of odd jobs all throughout high school and college. Because of all these jobs, I was luckily able to kind of pay for college and everything by myself with the help of financial aid. So I got really lucky. And when I, coming from more of a working class background, I really only thought about money when I graduated. So I actually wanted to work in Wall Street. So I worked at Goldman Sachs in fixed income and investment banking in New York. So that's where I started my career. Did that for a couple years, but just wasn't really passionate about what we were doing there. Money was good and everything, but really wanted to learn more about the business side and how businesses operate. So I worked over at the Boston Consulting Group, which is a big management consulting firm. Did that for a few more years, and then I got the startup bug. And so I tried to start a startup with a friend of mine, which completely failed, went into $200,000 worth of debt. And so I had to get a real job. We tried our best, it didn't work, had to restart again, right? And so, but doing the startup, I fell in love with technology, what it could mean for everybody, how it connected everybody. So I worked over at Google. So I had a job over in Silicon Valley at Google HQ in Mountain View. And I worked on Google Travel, Flight Search, and those kind of products. And then I got the startup bug again. I ran a big e-commerce startup and got that to about a decent size. And then I was taking a break when somebody introduced me to Kevin Chu, our chairman. And the reason he introduced me to Kevin Chu when he was starting this esports thing was what had actually happened was at Google, I played in a bunch of League of Legends tournaments. And these tournaments, I was one of the few business guys that was playing with all the engineers. It was all the internal tournaments. So one year, I think we won our basketball intramurals. So I was on that team, and we got third place in our League of Legends, internal tournaments. That was probably my most successful sports career year. So that's how I got a reputation as this business guy, just hangs out with all the engineers and plays all the internal tournaments. I was a Shaco one trick, but I learned how to play Vi, and this is way back, in the day. So I could play Zach, Vi, and Shaco. That was kind of the only things I played. So basically, when they banned Shaco, I was useless for the team, so I was on the bench a lot. But more important than anything, I think I had a reputation for working at startups, having a pure passion for esports and gaming. And when I got this opportunity, we were literally just starting this thing from a conference room, and we would just show up and think about how we're going to jump into the world of esports from a conference room. And fast forward 4 years, and we're here, and we've got a bunch of esports teams all around the world, and yeah, it's really exciting. And Not quite sure that's a normal career path, but it's been one that I've been really excited by, and I can't wait to do more things in the esports world.
So like thinking about like your experiences at Google and like compared to like startups, you would prefer like startup kind of jobs because like people would say that you know how Google is kind of like the place to work, and then you went to I mean everyone says that, right? And then but then like you bet on esports. It's kind of a bad
Yeah.
career to go, right? So what made you believe in esports so much?
Well, I think Google's a great place to work, right? And I learned a lot of great things about how do you work as part of this huge, huge organization and launch products that people love, right? And do things that people love. But for me, it just moved too slowly, right? I'm a startup guy. Like, I love the fact that you can take responsibility, think about something, launch it, and see if it works or not, right? Versus at Google, like I remember we wanted to like launch a book hotels on Google and Google Maps, right? So if you look for a hotel, you would say like, oh, I'm looking for hotels Los Angeles on Google Maps, right? There should be a way to book it, right? And you should be able to pay for it and help monetize it. But that thing just get it approved took like a year and a half, and I was just like, why is it a year and a half? Just because it's so much money, it's so much impact, it's so big, right? Like people all around the world are going to be impacted by this one button, right? Okay. So even though it's one button, it needs to go through a crazy approval process, right? And like that kind of speed was not something that interested me, right? And for me, working in a startup where I don't know what's going to happen on any given day, always new problems, always new great, awesome things. It's just so much more exciting. Like I wake up every morning just excited to go to work. And, no amount of money or prestige or whatever can take that away from me. So, plus I love gaming. I've always loved gaming. I've always loved watching esports. So being a part of it now, it's awesome. The only one thing I would say is that I actually had more time to play games at Google than I do working in esports because you're so busy all the time in esports that like you actually run out of time to play games yourself.
You have bigger responsibilities. So we've seen like managers of teams like changing teams a couple of years in the like every year or like couple of years, but you stick with like GenG for your entire career in esports. So what makes it so attractive that you wanted to like stick with this company?
Well, I mean, part of it is that like I'm a part owner of this company, right? So I want to make sure it's successful, right? But it's also, I think, the ability to really have an impact, be innovative, try new things, sometimes make mistakes, sometimes be successful. I really love the fact that we're able to help this thing really grow, right? And for me, like, it's as simple as like, there's just too many things to do still and too many things that we haven't accomplished yet that, we got to get the job done first, right? Like there's so many more things that we could do that we've only scratched the surface of. And I've been really excited by a lot of the initiatives that we've started. And so for me, I don't need to go anywhere else, right? Like this is, I'm a part owner of this team. I want to make sure it's successful. And there's a bunch of ideas that, we're just getting started in implementing. So yeah, I mean, just the ability, if I ever felt like there's like not much that I can help with, or the industry was just very stable and not changing anymore, that's a different story. But there's so much change coming into this industry as we speak. That's really exciting for me, right? Versus industries where it's much more stable, what's going to happen every year. And that's more boring to me.
So I've been doing a lot of like player stories, and I've learned that a lot of players came from like kind of a lower working class background or like single family background. And you also mentioned that you're also kind of from like a working class background. I'm not sure if it's the same in Korea, but at least in China, like most pro gamers didn't come from like wealth. So do you think that maybe that helps you like connect with them in a deeper level or a different level from other like managers?
I hope so. I think a lot of the culture still has to change. So, I guess kind of going into my background a little bit, like, especially in my generation, I'm pretty old now, like I'm 36. So, especially for my parents' generation, I grew up with just a single dad as well. He like raised me, cooked and cleaned, did everything. And yeah, I helped pay for rent and I paid for school. And, I got very lucky that, I worked really hard. I got good enough grades and, things got very lucky for me where I got the right job at the right time. And, it all ended up working out. And I try to like at least use that knowledge to be able to connect with players on a personal level. Because I understand that, for a lot of these players, if you think about what they're surrounded by, whether it's fans, coaches, girlfriends, friends, they only know about the player, right? They never ask about how the person's doing, right? Or who the person is and how their life is going, how their family's doing, right? So I try to make it a point that, yeah, I care a lot about winning, right? And sometimes you have to make tough decisions on the roster and who's on the team next year versus this year. But I always try to make it a point that, like, look, once you've been part of our organization, if you need any help, if you need advice, or if you want to just bounce ideas off of, we're always there, right? And the other thing too is, like, there's enough people asking about every single individual game thing. Like, I try to make it a point to at least ask them, how their personal life is, how their family's doing, and try our best to do the right thing whenever we can, to try to set an example, at least what we think should be the right example for esports and gaming. We don't always do it. There's always mistakes that we make. But, I like the fact that, we are not an organization where the owner is just completely not involved and has no idea what's going on. For, like, especially in Korea, where that happens a lot with some of these like huge, gigantic conglomerates where, the owner of that conglomerate has no idea, what the game is and how it works and what's in the meta and all that kind of stuff. So I try my best to encourage, open dialogue. I try my best to encourage, like, hey, look, contact me anytime. Of course, I think especially a lot of our players are a little bit shyer. And so they contact me about random things, but or they rarely contact me, but I at least try to keep an open door policy. So I hope that helps. And thus far, I think it's been pretty helpful. I think we've made a lot of strides where, players, coaches, they want to join our organization, right? And that's a big jump from where we were even a few years ago, where it was really hard to convince players to join our organization because we were brand new, they didn't know how we worked. So I think, at least on that side, I think we've done a good job of establishing ourselves as a good place to join as a player, as a coach, content creator. So I know we're very competitive when it comes to free agency, no matter what. And ultimately, that's my job as an owner, as the co-president, is to make sure that we are competitive for the long run, not just like we're going to freak out and make a change now, or but it's more, hey, if I'm looking at this long term, are more and more players, are we the first choice team, right? Whether it's staff, players, employees, business staff, like that's something that I always think about.
Cool. So do you think when the players come, like especially Korean players, are they like afraid to talk to you, or do you think they treat you as like a big brother?
I don't think it's a big brother relationship because, ultimately it's still work, right? Yeah. And, it's very rare that you can cut a brother from your family, So I also understand there are limits, right? So I kind of view it as like, look, we're going to be very professional about how we operate, but we're also going to try to go the extra mile and try to taking care of every single person that we can, right? So a lot of the stuff that we've done is I've been really pushing hard on stuff like player wellness. So I think we were the first org in Korea to separate kind of living like game houses versus, just having a separate facility versus your home. So you have a little more separation between work and play and all of this kind of stuff, or work and your where you live. The other is we were the first in Korea to do personal training available for every single one of our players. Not all of them take it, and right now, because of the restrictions, they couldn't go as often. But I know, for instance, Life had lost like 25 kilos, just been going through like a personal training program, fixing his diet, feels like he has a lot more energy. He's going to be healthier long run. We have sports psychiatrists available for every single one of our players. We're even doing stuff around like interesting stuff like helping sleep tracking so that they can sleep better, so they can sleep better in the night and those kind of things. So, we just try really our best to take care of our players because that builds a really strong reputation that we take care of them while they're here. But even after when they retire, right? We want to be the first one. Be like, hey, are you looking to start a career in streaming? So players like Ambition, QV, they've become huge streamers for us when they retire, right? And kind of showing players that it's not just about, managing your career while you're here with us. You got to think about it long term and who's going to be really helping you, not just here today, but also into the future. And I think that makes us a very competitive organization when, players and coaches are looking at us for free agency because they know we take care of them.
Cool. Thank you. So I guess there's also like a question, the next question is about how you're like very active on like social media, right? And it's kind of in contrast with some like other Korean managers, whether or not their English is good enough. They don't really do social media that much. And people might have some like perceptions about like people that does a lot of social media. So are you trying to bring a different energy to Korea, or is it your personal kind of, you just want to be shine as your personality and let people know who you are?
I think this is more about, I like engaging with fans, and it helps me understand the scene better, right? And the other part is, I don't really look at what other teams do. I'll be very honest with you. Like, I know you're supposed to do that. It's really very competitive about like what all these other teams are doing, what they do, what they don't do. Honestly, I think we got to focus on what we can do, what we can build, how we can do something different and stand out in the industry. So I always tell our team, like our team members will often be like, oh, T1 did this, we got to do it too. I'm like, why? Let's figure out what we're good at and do that, right? And, I'll give you a couple of good examples, right? Like when we were signing Ambition, when we were signing Cubase, a lot of people wondering, like, why are we doing that? Like, a lot of Korean orgs don't sign streamers that much, and I was like, no, I think we can build something really awesome. And we're also showing our players that like your career doesn't end when you stop your pro player career. You can have you can even make even more money if you're smart and successful, right? And you work hard. So for me, it's not about like proving a point or doing anything. It's just kind of who we are. It's in our DNA. It's in my DNA, and I always say, like, you can't be somebody else, and the organization cannot be another organization. You have to just try to be better at what you do and who you are. So yeah, I guess it's not really a spicy answer, but
it's just you.
We're just doing it because it's who we are.
We'd like to ask you some questions about like GenG at Worlds, because Worlds is going on right now. So I guess the first question would be, how do you think GenG is going to do at Worlds this year?
I think, we've had a lot of issues, that a lot of the tough times in the year, right? And, it's the team now, I really do believe, they've have like this pure focus on really trying to figure out, like, they've already know what the problems are in the team. They know what they need to fix and they're working on fixing them, right? That's all you can really ask of a team, right? And if I compare last year versus this year, the biggest difference is that, right? Oh, also Ruler isn't having like ear issues like last year that are like medical issues. I don't know if you know, last year, Ruler had an ear infection that was really bothering him. It was making him dizzy, but he was like, he refused to like, he just was like, I'm gonna play, and he did a great job for us. So if I compare last year to this year, it's last year, all of the players, staff, lots of disagreement about what they need to fix. This year, at the very least, players, coaches know exactly what they need to fix and they're working on it, right? So for me, I think the difference between last year and this year is big. And it's positive so far. Scrims are going well. That's the classic line. And I also think it's going to be really exciting to watch. Every single region I've talked to and team I've talked to, the meta is all over the place. And what's also even more unique of what's going on right now is that normally all of the teams fly in and they kind of converge to one meta, right? Right now, what's going on is that, you know, the Western teams flew in first. So they kind of created their own meta. And then the LCK and LPL teams were scrimmaging, right? So they created their own meta. Now that they're flying in, people are like, wait, these are two different metas. And so everybody's scrambling to figure out what the meta is actually going to be, right? Especially with champs like Tryndamere and like these things that are like typically not part of the meta during the season, all coming in.
Yeah.
So it's really fascinating. Things are changing basically every game. Everybody's watching every single playing game. All the scrims, people are figuring out like who's right, who's wrong. This is one of the most unpredictable metas that I've ever seen. So I'm really excited to watch. Even in the early playing games, you can tell it's like people are figuring it out on the fly, right? And so I think it's going to be an awesome Worlds.
Yeah, I mean, I was like reading some leaks the other day, and then it's like completely wrong yesterday. Anyway.
Yeah, well, and of course, like, you know, in the middle of all this, there's all these leaks and, you know, free agency rumors and stuff. I mean, that's what's so exciting about this thing, right? Like, that's why I love sports. That's why I love League. That's why I love esports. Like, this is why it's what you work so hard to have a chance for.
Awesome. Okay, so we know how like roller is like highly regarded in the industry in Korea and by professionals. But like as like an outsider or as fans, maybe they might not be able to see how good roller is. So if I want to ask you to like tell like the audience or like people compare roller to other like top ADC players in the world. What is his like most specialty or like his strength?
You know, maybe a better way for me to answer that is like trying to, like, anybody can talk about like why he's so good, look at the stats and look at his accolades, look at, you know, all of that kind of stuff. But I'll share a more personal story or more of a different perspective rather. So one thing that I know is, you know, the opinions of pros, coaches, I think they matter a lot, right? And, you know, oftentimes perception outside of, you know, people kind of in the know in the industry is often really just based on outcomes, right? So it's outcome driven storylines and narratives, right? And, you know, there's a reason why Ruler has been kind of underrated in terms of perception is because, you know, we haven't had domestic success. We haven't had, you know, world success, you know, over the past few years, right? I mean, he's won worlds, but at the same time, like, we haven't had a domestic title. So, you know, the big matches that people watch all over the world, fortunately, we've fallen short, right? But there's a couple points that I want to make. This guy is the hardest working guy we have that I've seen, you know, or one of the hardest working guys, you know, across all of our esports teams, right? You know, most players, you know, when they lose, next day they need some time to, like, you know, kind of de-stress. And this guy, the next day, he's back on the server, right? And practicing and thinking about what he needs to do to get better. So that kind of dedication, I think, is unparalleled. The other point that I would have to make is that if you want a story of how great of a player he is and how recognized he is within pros and the pro community, he is one of the, I would say he's the pro that every single other laner wants to play with. you know, and you know there are other ADCs that people don't want to play with, right? This guy is always on the top of the list of every single free agent for who they want to play with, right? And that says a lot, but it's also great for us as an organization because that gives us the ability to be able to go and recruit the best players in the world when we need, right? And so for me, I think those are kind of a couple of things that people probably don't see, and I just thought they were kind of interesting things to kind of tell the story.
Cool, thank you. So what kind of advantages or disadvantages do you think Korea as a region has here at Worlds this year?
I think people are struggling with the food. So apparently Icelandic cuisine is not to the taste of the average Korean person. But apparently there's a really good burger spot out there. And so, I'm hoping they find it and figure it out. We took a bunch of food ourselves over just in case, so I'm sure they'll be fine. So I think the biggest thing that I worry about right now is that since the meta is shifting so rapidly, there's going to be not as much practice time to be able to really figure it out. And the other is our players are not used to playing with 60 ping, right, in solo queue. So because they're not used to it, they're not getting enough individual practice time at a quality level that is high enough besides the scrims. So I think those two are kind of the disadvantages that maybe people aren't talking about on the LCK side. I mean, just the fact that the meta is changing so rapidly and that you don't get enough individual solo queue practice time at a high enough quality to be able to, especially with new champs that have been out of the meta for so long, to be able to practice it is tough.
Cool, thank you. Okay, so the following questions, we want to ask you a little bit about how GenG is doing in China and what your plans are in the future.
Yeah, I think the LPL is, on the path right now to be the strongest region in the world, right? And for us, our long-term plan, and I think this is a difference between how I think versus maybe how other, owners and organizations think is, I think about what's important now, but I trust in our team and our staff to think about today. Like what I try to think about more is like where things are going long-term, right? Which is LPL is a powerhouse of a region, right? And so for us to be able to have better relationships, better understanding of the industry, really help grow and cultivate the fan base there, those are so important for us, right? Like, I back before, all this stuff happened, I would just fly out to China every chance I get. The food is incredible and amazing. We even did a boot camp out there to try to get some good scrims in, have a bit of a different style heading into the season. We have a lot of plans that are kind of put on hold at the moment. It's hard to fly in there right now, right? But I fully believe that once things open up again in the future, hopefully soon, that there's going to be a lot of opportunities for us to do cool stuff with the fan community. I think community is going to be really big for us. So building a really strong community in China, building a really strong community here in Korea, building a really strong community just globally all around the world. We had all of these initiatives that were in place, but everything had to be put on hold, right? And then even on the competitive side, I think there's so many things we could do. And we've had success like having trainees train over there, bringing trainees over here to Korea to train. We were one of the first to open up tryouts and start looking for trainees even out of Vietnam, right? Like my goal is to make GenG the destination, not just for existing pros that are looking for a team spot or content creators looking for a team spot, but even people that are like trying to become a pro, trying to become a content creator. I want to establish those relationships in the key markets. And, honestly, like you can't smartly run an esports organization without knowing what's going on in the biggest esports market in the world, right? So in order for me to be better at my job, I need to do a better job of understanding the esports scene in China. And so, plus I miss the food. I do miss the food a lot. we do have like the lamb kebabs, like Feng Mao, and we have hot pot here. It's not the same in LA or in Seoul. So and it's really hard to get the steamed fish. That's also a really good dish. So yeah, we got a lot of plans out there. But hey, we'll be patient. We want to do things safely. We want to do things when travel is easier. Yeah, but we're excited for when all these things open up and we can do a lot of exciting things.
On the esports industry in general, so I guess you're also very into traditional sports. So can you comment on how the difference is between esports and traditional sports? Less on the surface, less on the technical side, more on like the mentality side and how it's gonna like grow maybe in the future.
So we have Chris Bosch, who's a former NBA player, and he's, an advisor for us. We have, ex-MLB people on our staff. And, we work very closely with other athletes as well. And so one of the biggest things that I think is missing right now, every single athlete in the pro sports world, they're thinking about, how do I build my brand? Right? Of course, they're giving 100% into their sport, but they're also building the infrastructure of building their own brand, so that when they retire, that they have a career and a brand that can help them in transition into the next level, right? Unfortunately, a lot of esports players today, they don't think that far ahead, and they don't have very good role models. Encouraging them to, hey, you should be building your brand. You should be, more active on social media. You should be doing these things, right? And those success cases are only happening now for people like Ambition, for people like Cuvée, where now they're being so successful. And a lot of it is because, and they always tell me, man, I wish I had spent more time building up my brand when I was a pro. How much bigger could I have been when I'm doing this post-pro career? So I think that's the biggest difference, is that the infrastructure, the role models, that know-how of how to do that doesn't exist right now. But I think that's not going to be long. I think that's going to change. And we actively encourage our players to, engage more, do more things with fans. Because ultimately, like, I think before it was kind of like an old model of like the team does everything and the players just play. Like, that's not the future of the business, right? That's not where it's going. It's going to really be up to the individual player to figure out like, hey, this is how I want to engage with my fan base. Here's the brand that I want to build. Here's the opportunities I'm interested in. And I think that has to happen. And I think it'll happen, I think, over the course of the next 2 to 3 years, where more and more players will, take control of their brand, be super successful, and drive Lamborghinis and Ferraris when they retire, And I'm really excited about it. And, I always tell anybody, like, look, any kind of advice you need, whether it's on the business side, legal side, whatever it is, if you were part of our organization, you're part of our community, let me know, and we're happy to help, even if you're not part of our team, right? And so it's just something that I always try to reinforce across the board, that if you spend any time with us as a pro, like, once a tiger, always a tiger is kind of something that I've always talked about. That's something that I really try to reinforce. That's where I see the biggest gap between traditional sports pros and esports pros, is they don't quite understand that yet.
Okay. So last question. So what do you think esports industry needs, like financially, to sustain itself like a traditional sport over like 20, 30, 40 years?
There's a bit of a controversial take, but I would say the esports industry is in a lot of trouble right now. And it's not in trouble because less people care about it. More and more people care about it every day. But not enough progress is being made on the actual business model itself, right? And that's a huge problem, right? You can't rely on prize earnings. You can't rely on merch. Like, the only way that the esports industry, in my opinion, will actually work and will be able to continue to pay these really high salaries is for publishers to step up and create digital revenue opportunities for teams and for players, right? Whether it's skins, whether it's icons or awards, and whatever the heck it is, we need to smartly think of a way to create a sustainable ecosystem that is digitally driven, that is in cooperation with the publishers, that is exciting for fans, right? That's the only way this business will work. My prediction is, we're going to go through a winter in esports, right? Where, maybe like a bunch of teams that, are great are just not going to last because the current business model doesn't support the level of the salaries, doesn't support the scene in a healthy way, right? Like, the top players are getting paid millions of dollars, but the average first-year player coming out doesn't make even close to that, right? And they don't really have a viable career. They basically are giving up their entire alternative career and putting it on hold to become a pro. And the vast majority don't become the rulers of the world, right? They are in for a bit. Maybe they jump around between tier 2 teams, and then your pro career is over. That's the majority of the story for pro players, right? And so I think in order for us to have a healthier ecosystem, one that's digitally driven with the publisher that creates new digital revenue opportunities. This is a digital sport and there's not enough digital revenue opportunities, but one that also takes care of our players, not just the very top. Like, honestly, the very top players don't need a lot of financial help, as you know. They probably need financial help in terms of advice, not wasting their money, managing it, investing it properly. But really, how do you help create a more sustainable ecosystem for all of the pros that come in, not just the very top, right? And then how do you create a sustainable ecosystem for teams so that they can continue to invest back into the scene, right? And I think the only answer is publishers need to step up and create new digital opportunities and digital revenue opportunities. Otherwise, I don't think this thing works.
Sounds like a long way to go.
It's going to take a long time, right? And the teams that suffer the most are the teams in the middle and at the bottom. The top teams, we're getting bigger and bigger sponsorship deals. We've been very lucky. At the same time, the system doesn't work unless it works for more teams and more players.
Thank you so much for your answers. Really great answers. Thank you for the interview. I'll see you next time.
Thank you so much. Take care. Bye.